Okay, in this lesson, we are going to talk about shot composition. Now, we're just going to talk about a few rules that will help and guide you with the composing of your shots, right? And the first rule we're going to introduce here is the rule of thirds. Now, this rule is a very basic rule in photography and cinematography, and a lot of you may be familiar with it, but I'm just going to go through it for those who may not be familiar. Now, the rule of thirds is basically four lines, two running horizontally and two running vertically, creating a grid of nine rectangles or squares, depending on the composition. And what these lines do is that they create 4 points on the composition. That these 4 points are great areas in your composition to place subjects or objects at that will seem pleasing to the eye to an audience, right? So right now we have an example here with a medium close-up shot of someone, right? And the reason this composition is pleasing to the eye is because it's on that point. The person's face is on that point, and we want the audience to look at that person's face, right? Now, this person is facing the right, so the best place that we could have put this person's face is on the left side of the screen and on that point, right? Now, if you wanted, if the person was facing left, the better place would have been to put it on the right side, right, on that point, right? Now we have a more wider shot with the full body of the character, and as you can see, the face of the person is placed right on that dot, and it's a nice focal point for the audience to look at. That's really pleasing, and it's not jarring, it's not out of the way, it's not in any weird positions, right? And if you look at the whole scene, right, you could see that the character is looking at maybe the rock in the corner, and you could see the point that is created on the lower half of the scene. The rock is on that point, right? So you have like the two subjects on those points, right? Now, you're not totally restricted when you're using the rule of thirds, right? You don't like totally have to place everything directly on these points. They are much more of a guide for you when you're composing your scenes and make it easier for you to place objects in the scene, right? Now, those were the points on the rule of thirds. Now we're going to look at the two horizontal lines on the rule of thirds, right? Now, these two horizontal lines act as two areas in which you can place your horizon line. Now, in this first example, we have the horizon line being the lower horizontal line on the grid, right? Now, when you place your horizon line here, it's usually that you want to emphasize more of the top area of the scene. So in this scene, we want to emphasize the sky and maybe the blue clouds over the house in the scene, right? So we would place the horizon line at the bottom there, right? Now, in a different scene where we would want to emphasize the lower half of the scene, we want to emphasize maybe more of the grass, more of what's happening on the ground plane, right? We can place the horizon line on the top half of the grid horizontal line. So in this scene, we would want to emphasize more of the house and the car going towards the house. Now, if you want to emphasize more of that, we wouldn't show more of the sky, right? We would show more of the land. So that is why in this one we carry the horizon line up more towards the upper half, right? And even in this scene, we could see that we place the two objects on the points, right? We have the car on one of the grid points, and then we have the house on the grid points, because there are two focal points of the scene, right? The car and the house. Now we're gonna move on to another composition tool, or it's another way of composing a scene, is a centered composition, right? Things directly in the middle of a scene. Now, when someone is watching a movie, when an object is placed like dead center in the composition, it usually pulls the most focus. So whatever objects around that subject will always come maybe second to the audience member. So placing objects in the dead center, as you can see, which is another good way of focusing your audience's attention, is putting something in the dead center. Like in this example, we have a close-up medium, a medium close-up of this character, and his face is dead center in the scene, right? Now, we don't always have to place the person's face dead center. You could have some leeway when you're placing the object. So in this example, we have on the top one, we have a medium shot of a person outstretching their hand there, but as you can see, their face isn't totally in the dead center. It's slightly above, and you could place some objects slightly above and still in the center. The point doesn't have to be between their eyes all the time, dead center. And the same thing in the bottom here. We have the subject. He is in the center of the screen, but he isn't dead center. And this is still okay to place your subject. He doesn't always have to be dead center. You have some leeway in between, the areas around dead center. Right? Now, even when you're doing wider shots and you have more scenes with like buildings and outside, you could also use the dead center composition. So in this one, we have a house in the middle of the field, and we want our audience to look directly at the house. We don't want the audience to be distracted by anything else from this house, because we know that the story is happening in this house and we want them to focus on that house. It's the same thing with a subject placed in an environment, right? There's so much complexities happening in the environment, and maybe the subject might be really small. We might want the subject to be small so we could show the environment. What we would do is place the subject in the dead center, right? That's if we want our audience to focus on our subject, even though he's so small in the scene. Using dead center composition will make it a lot easier for the audience to focus on this subject. So now we're going to move on to our next way of composing your scenes, and it's understanding object size in your scene, right? So the basic idea here is that any object that is really large in your scene will pull most of the attention, and it will be telling the audience, look at this object. Because of its size, it will relate to its importance, right? So size is relative to importance. So in this scene, we have a guy who is much closer to the camera, and you can see in the background we have people maybe in a crowd looking on, right? Now, the most important thing in this scene, obviously, because of his size, is this character in front who seems to be ready to engage in a fight of some sort, right? So he is the most important object in the scene. Now we have our next example here with a guy pointing a gun towards someone or something, right? Now, the most important thing in this scene is the gun, because the gun is almost as big as the person in the scene, right? The second most important thing in the scene is the actual guy, but the most important thing is the gun. It's the deciding factor in the scene, and the way we do that is we increase the size of the gun in the frame, so we create a sense of massive importance, right? It's the same thing with these buildings here. You could use size for characters, you could use size for objects, you could use size for environments. Now, in this scene, we have a sense of massive structures here, and they're so huge compared to the person who is at the bottom corner, bottom left hand corner, he isn't as important as these massive structures in the scene. When we look at the scene, we know that the structures are the most important things in the scene. So this scene could be used as maybe a opening scene or a wide shot to show where the story is going to take place, and we're showing the importance of these structures in that scene, right? So we're going to move on again to another way of composing your scene, and it's called frame within a frame, right? Now basically in this shot type, we're going to use elements in the scene itself, right, that create frames that would frame an object of importance, right? So basically we have the camera viewfinder, right? Now within the camera viewfinder, in this example, we have a character who is behind some trees. Now if you look at the branches of the trees, you will see that they kind of create a frame that's not really a square, but it frames the subject in a space, right? And this framing allows the audience to focus even more on that subject, right? It creates a frame it removes all the other distractions from the scene and allows the audience to focus on that frame. So let's look at another example here. Now this is an example that's used in a lot of movies, using the door frame as a scene, as using the frame of the door as a frame within the frame of the scene, right? Now this really allows you to focus on the character within that room. Now the audience is outside of the room, but the frame allows us to not be distracted by anything outside of the door frame. So this is a really, really nice frame within a frame scene, right? So these are rules that you could use to help you in terms of composing your scenes, right? We're going to move on to your assignment now for this class. Okay guys, for the assignment, what I want you to do is choose a scene from your favorite movie or any movie, right? Then take screenshots of every shot in that scene, and I want you to draw the rule of thirds grid onto each frame. And when you draw the grid, I want you to analyze how the scene was composed. Do any of the subjects fall on any of the points of the rule of thirds, right? And then I want you to draw the dead center grid on the same scene. Analyze the scene and see if the director used this as a guide to compose the scene. So here are some examples of what I want you to do. I took some screenshots of scenes from the last scene in David Fincher's Seven. And what I did was I just drew the guidelines of the rule of thirds onto the scene or onto the composition, and I basically just did that to see where the director placed the subject, if he placed them on any of the points, to see how he composed the shots as compared to the rule of thirds, whether he used the rule of thirds or he didn't use the rule of thirds. This is just a basic exercise for you to try to help you analyze scenes and break them down so that you could eventually use scenes that you see in your stories.